Dr. William Samuel Ruto, distinguished excellencies from different countries, our governors, and all other guests. Good morning. My name is Judy Kipkenda from the Ogiek people of Kenya. We the African indigenous peoples gathered for the African Climate Summit Pre-Summit Forum from the 1st to 3rd of September 2023 here in Nairobi, Kenya. Hereby, we call on African states, governments, bilateral institutions, and other actors to create a focal point and liaison offices at the African Union headquarters of Africa for indigenous peoples. We call on them to ensure effective and meaningful participation of African indigenous peoples in all development agendas and high-level decision-making processes such as the African Climate Summit. We call for stop to further displacement or forceful evictions of indigenous peoples from their territories. We call on you to affirm effective safeguards and security of land tenure and natural resources to guarantee bare minimum application of free prior informed consent, principles on any investments or projects on indigenous peoples' lands and territories as enshrined in the United Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights. We call for the recognition and strengthening of traditional knowledge systems that promote adaptation and resilience through policy frameworks and programs. We call for partnerships that integrate traditional knowledge with conventional scientific knowledge systems and practices. We call that you ensure ease of mobility of Africa indigenous peoples scattered across nation states through policy interventions and mutually negotiated transhumance protocols to help promote climate resilience. We also call that you develop clear guidelines and policy frameworks to cushion indigenous peoples from potential exploitation of dishonest investors, especially on carbon trading. We call that you accelerate meaningful and impactful sustainable development projects and benefit sharing. Establish Indigenous Peoples Climate Resilience Fund to accelerate the realization of sustainable development goals and to mitigate against the impact of climate change on indigenous peoples, in particularly women, children, youths, and persons with disability. In conclusion, we reiterate that although we, the indigenous peoples, contribute the least to global emissions that lead to climate change, we suffer the most from its consequences. We are here with a solution and experiential lessons from Mama Africa. There can be nothing for us without us. Thank you so much. Mr. President, if you would like, I would like to present this to you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that extremely important response. A warm round of applause there as well. Thank you. We'd like to invite a response now on behalf of the ecumenical community and ask Reverend Dr. Lesmore to say a few words.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Africa indeed is a religious continent, and therefore nothing can be done without recognizing the influence of religion in whatever that we do as a people and as a continent. Incidentally, the Africa Climate Summit is taking place within the season of creation, where people of faith and good intentions are invited to pray and take action for our common home that is bleeding and groaning because of human actions driven by greed. We as a people of faith, we recognize that matters of climate change are matters of life and death and cannot be commodified, cannot be objectified, and cannot be politicized. And we are driven by that. And that is how, as people of faith, we gather during this summit, reminding ourselves that the welfare of the earth is our welfare. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Nairobi Declaration for us, having reviewed it, is both bitter and sweet aspects, which presents fears and hopes of the future. We as people of faith that are often the first respondents in crisis situations, including the ones that are caused by climate change, are wrestling with the question whether there is honesty and truthfulness in the entire process of negotiation. We are worried that the sweet part of the declaration, which is the call to action, will be subsumed by exigencies of time and many other aspects. Your Excellencies, as people of faith, we continue to pray and act rightly for the common good of all, while calling for greater transparency in climate finance management. It is greatly going to be beneficial if a mechanism like what was used during the Global Fund to combat HIV, malaria, and TB, the country coordinating mechanism, is very important, and if we can institute that, all the stakeholders within a country will find space in climate financing that will lead to greater adaptation and resilience for our people. May God bless Africa, our home, and our future. I thank you. Mr. President, I also have a text of sermon for you.
Some additional evening reading, Your Excellency. I'd like to invite a response now on behalf of civil society, Dr. Mifika Mwenda, with the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance.
Dear Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. I'm honored once again to address this all-important summit. Each of us, when we came here, aimed for an outcome that would be transformative and reflective of the urgency of addressing the climate crisis based on latest science, the imperatives of climate justice, and for Africa, recognition of the continent as the special needs and the circumstances region. Throughout the 2 days, we have listened to our leaders and all key stakeholders. We have no doubt, listening to our leaders, that they understand the existential threats posed by the climate emergency, and in totality, hearing from them, we have some convergence on very critical issues. And one of it is enhanced contribution by those who have caused the climate crisis to honor their commitment by deeply cutting their emissions, because that is where the biggest problem is, and ceasing from transferring the burden of action to the victims of their actions, in the name of four solutions to climate change. And so, also, providing, which is very important, adequate, predictable, and easily accessible finance, particularly for adaptation and resilience building in Africa. At this critical moment, Excellencies, we urge you to prioritize the suffering of the people of Africa, regardless of this outcome. We implore to act with one vision and speak one voice at the upcoming COP28 in UAE, and really urge you to really reflect on what is happening to our people. I want to conclude by saying that time is of essence. The scientific evidence is compelling, the window of opportunity is closing, and the stakes are too high. We must act swiftly, together, for a sustainable, ecologically just, equitable future for Africa and the world. And Your Excellency, following the protocol of others, I would urge that I present also a text, though I know we are presented and submitted our document. Thank you, Your Excellency, for accepting to receive me.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite a response now on behalf of parliamentarians, the Honourable Charity Kathambi Chepkwony, Chair of the Parliamentary Caucus on Climate Change.
Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Your Excellencies, guests, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Charity Kathambi Chepkwony, Member of Parliament from Kenya, from part of Rift Valley. Your Excellency, as members of Parliament from Africa, this is our first comment. Climate change is real. We are now here to act. As parliamentarians from Pan-Africa Parliament, Africa Regional Parliament, various national parliaments gathered at the parliamentary dialogue at the sidelines of the Africa Climate Summit that was on 31st to 1st September. We sat, Your Excellency, and these are remarks of the legislators from Africa. Number one, we urge the Africa leaders to prioritize climate change adaptation in their engagement in the global and regional processes and dialogue to address the climate crisis, particularly during the COP28. Number two, we call for increased support and solidarity from international community, especially the developed countries, to provide adequate, predictable, and accessible financing, technology transfer, and the capacity building for Africa adaptation effort in line with the Paris Agreement goal of mobilizing US $100 billion annually by 2020. Our number three call, Your Excellencies, is prioritizing the rapid operationalization of the Santiago Network on loss and damage as means to catalyze technical assistance to developing countries that are vulnerable. And Your Excellency, our number four, we stress the need to more than triple adaptation finance for Africa, largely in form of grants, as current levels are insufficient to meet the estimated adaptation costs in developing countries in Africa. Number five, Your Excellency, we request for support to finalize the implementation of the global goal of adaptation under the Paris Agreement, which aims to enhance adaptive capacity, strengthen resilience, and reduce vulnerability to climate change in a measurable, reportable, and viable manner. And our number 6, Your Excellency, as legislators from Africa, we appeal for enhanced cooperation and coordination among Africa countries and the region to share best practices, mobilizing climate funds to scale advance across border programs. And our number 7, as legislators from Africa, Your Excellency, we are committed as legislators to effectively execute our legislative roles, oversight, and the budgetary mandate to ensure that Africa has the right legal and the policy frameworks and the needed resources to aid climate change in response interventions in Africa. And our number 10, as legislators, Your Excellency, we are calling upon Africa Union member states to ensure that members of parliament are part of the national delegation in various national areas. And lastly, Your Excellency, we applaud you as the President of Kenya for having this Africa's Climate Summit, for also having time and coming to launch our Africa meeting, which we had with the legislators in South Africa. And Your Excellency, thank you so much as legislators. We appreciate for getting this platform where we get possession to share our ideas, our challenges, and the best practices. And lastly, Your Excellency, it is also good in this forum I say that Kenya is the first country in Africa continent to have a Climate Change Act 2016. And lastly, Your Excellency, we have also managed to do the new amendment bill 2023 in inclusion of